Autumn in New York, the golden leaves of Central Park crunched beneath Emily's boots as she walked briskly, clutching her coffee. The chill in the air reminded her why she loved autumn in New York. It was the season of new beginnings. She had moved to the city 6 months ago, chasing her dream of becoming a writer. But between her job as a bookstore clerk and the loneliness of a new city, she wondered if she had made a mistake. One evening, as she was stacking books, a man walked in, looking completely lost. "Excuse me," he said, his voice warm and deep. "Do you have a copy of The Great Gatsby?" She turned and found herself looking into the kindest brown eyes she had ever seen. "We sure do," she said, leading him to the classic literature section. "It's a great book." "I know," he smiled. "It was my late mom's favorite. I just moved here and thought I'd start with something familiar." Emily felt an unexpected connection. "Welcome to New York, then," she said. "I moved here recently too." That night, they sat in a nearby cafe, talking for hours. His name was Daniel, a musician from Chicago, and like her, he was searching for something, maybe even himself. Over the next few weeks, they explored the city together, reading poetry on the steps of the Met, watching street performers in Times Square, and dancing in the rain after a sudden autumn storm. But love stories are never simple. Daniel received an offer to tour with a major band, a once-in-a-lifetime chance. Leaving New York meant leaving Emily behind. "I don't want to go," he confessed, holding her hands on their last night together. "But you have to," she whispered. "This is your dream." He left, and for months, Emily threw herself into her writing, channeling the ache of missing him into her words. One day, her book was finally accepted by a publisher. Her dream had come true, but she still felt an emptiness. Then, on the first snowy evening of winter, she heard a familiar voice outside her bookstore. "I read your book," Daniel said, standing there with snowflakes in his hair. "And I realized something. My dream isn't complete without you." Tears filled her eyes as she ran into his arms. Sometimes, love stories don't end, they find their way back home. Autumn in New York, Part 2. Snowflakes melted in Emily's hair as she buried her face in Daniel's coat, breathing in the familiar scent of coffee and winter air. He was here. After months of silence, longing, and unanswered questions, he had returned. "I thought you were still on tour," she whispered, her voice unsteady. Daniel cupped her face gently. "I was. But every city, every stage, every song, I kept thinking of you. I read your book and realized that no dream was worth chasing if it meant losing you." Tears blurred Emily's vision. "But, music is your dream, Daniel. I never wanted to hold you back." "You never did," he said. "But I've spent months running from what I was really searching for." He smiled, brushing a snowflake from her cheek. "I want to be with you. I want to make music here, in this city, with you beside me." Emily felt the warmth of his hands despite the cold. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "More than I've ever been about anything." A new chapter the following weeks passed in a blur of soft kisses, late-night conversations, and warm cups of cocoa by the bookstore window. Daniel found a small studio where he could work on his music, and Emily's book release was just around the corner. One evening, they stood on the Brooklyn Bridge, watching the city lights shimmer on the water. "You know," Daniel said, "your book's about finding home. I think I finally understand that now." Emily turned to him. "What do you mean?" He took her hands in his. "Home isn't a city or a dream we chase. It's the person we want to share it with." Emily felt a tear slip down her cheek, but this time, it wasn't from sadness. Then I guess we're finally home. As the wind carried the last golden leaves of autumn into the night, they kissed under the New York skyline, two dreamers who had finally found their way back to each other. Autumn in New York, Part 3. Winter melted into spring, and New York City blossomed with new beginnings. Emily's novel had become a quiet success, her name appearing in local literary circles. Daniel, too, found his rhythm, literally. He played intimate gigs in cozy cafes, his music gaining a devoted following. Life felt perfect. Almost. One evening, as they sat in their favorite corner of the bookstore, Daniel's fingers absent-mindedly strumming his guitar, Emily sensed something was on his mind. "You've been quiet," she said, setting her tea down. "Something's bothering you." Daniel sighed, setting his guitar aside. "I got an offer." Emily's heart clenched. "An offer?" He nodded. "A record deal. It's with an indie label in Los Angeles. They want me to record an album, tour with some big names." A heavy silence filled the space between them. "That's amazing," she said, forcing a smile. "It's everything you've worked for." Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "Yeah. But it's in LA. It means being away for months. And I just got you back, Em." She looked down, tracing the rim of her cup. "You have to go, Daniel. You can't turn this down for me." "But what if I lose you again?" His voice was barely a whisper. Emily swallowed hard. "You won't." Love across miles, they promised to make it work. Calls, texts, late-night video chats. But long-distance love wasn't easy. Emily missed the way Daniel hummed while making coffee in the morning. The way he would wrap his arms around her when she got lost in writing. The warmth of his presence beside her on cold New York nights. And Daniel, he missed everything. The sound of her laughter, the way she would tuck her hair behind her ear when she was deep in thought, the scent of old books and vanilla that clung to her sweaters. Months passed. Emily threw herself into her second novel, and Daniel's career flourished. But the distance carved cracks between them. Calls became shorter. Texts went unanswered. And one night, Emily stared at her phone, her heart sinking. He hadn't called in 3 days. The next morning, she booked a flight to LA. A crossroads. When Emily arrived at the recording studio, she saw Daniel through the glass window, lost in his music. He looked different, happier, in his element. And suddenly, she realized something. Maybe love wasn't about holding someone back. Maybe real love was about letting them soar, even if it meant watching from afar. When Daniel finally saw her, his eyes lit up. He rushed to her, pulling her into his arms. "Emily! What are you doing here?" She looked up at him, forcing a smile. "I had to see you. I had to tell you that. I'm proud of you, Daniel. And I don't want to be the reason you ever hold back." His smile faded. "What are you saying?" Tears welled in her eyes. "I love you. I always will. But I think this is where our paths diverge, for now." Daniel's grip tightened on her hands. "No, Em. We can make this work."